and gentlemen, welcome on this glorious and amazing day. I spent years and years trying to figure out why is it people go through trauma, they go through so much. You don't see the effect of a lot of traumas like you see within molestation. To the alarming level of suicide and so many mental illnesses as a result. It was just 3 minutes, sometimes 1 minute, sometimes an hour, sometimes over a few years, but there was nothing scary. There was something inappropriate. Why is it that children experiment with each other sexually? A larger number that you want to believe, but they do. It's normal. And they're some of them feel guilty, some of them feel uncomfortable, especially within religion. They feel like they're doing a big sin. But they don't suffer from PTS. They don't freak out. And yet a 10-year-old that's molested just one time, suddenly it just spirals out of control month by month by month. And sadly, I know too many people that actually went to suicide because of it. And I read, and I did research, and I read, and I did research. And the only thing that I have seen is they have lost trust in adults. They were betrayed. They felt powerless. And nothing made sense to me. Because I've dealt with it so much. Powerless? Well, I know some children that asked for it. What do you mean powerless? Well, it wasn't the same age, you have a 20-year-old with a 10-year-old, and they're just not the same level. And I think after 15 years, I finally got it. And my mind just exploded. And I think whoever's a survivor will actually enjoy this, because I talked to many survivors after years of therapy, and they still never work through this confusion. When someone goes through trauma does cause problems. When someone is brought up, for example, in a house where there's someone constantly yelling and blowing tantrums and freaking out, the child gets scared. It could even cause PTSD. It could cause a lot of issues of not trusting. But there is only one thing happening within trauma, and that's trauma. Within molestation, there's something very different than trauma, and that's why the trauma is way worse. And what I might even talk about later on is what happens to many of these survivors of how they go about life unless they work through this interesting trauma. How is this trauma very, very different? Let me use an analogy first. Imagine one day you're sitting in the kitchen and you want to go to the fridge to get whatever you want to get. So you gives a signal, you get up from your chair and you begin to walk. Oh, this is tough. You begin to walk towards the fridge. And suddenly your body begins to walk to the living room. And you tell your body to walk towards the fridge, and your body begins to walk to the living room. That is molestation. Ladies and gentlemen, that is molestation. How in the world? I'll explain to you in a minute. It's the only time in a person's life that they have two very deep polar feelings that happen simultaneously. And it is so frightening to the equivalent fear of you deciding to get something from the fridge and your body starts walking to the living room. So in essence, of course there was sexuality involved, but what happens to your brain has nothing to do with sexuality. It has to do, you wanted one thing, you got something else, or you got something else, you wanted something else. It is beyond confusing, and it is very, very scary. That's the reason why they lose trust. Forget about trusting adults. They don't trust themselves. The idea of trust is gone. What happened to their brain is because they love the affectionate part, and 90% of the molestation starts with affection, and some kids, that is the first encounter with love, warmth, affection, kindness, closeness, bonding, that their body is so craving, like we spoke about in the first few clips of child molestation prevention, that they actually enjoy it. So there's a huge joy and good feeling. Yet, for whatever reason, humans do not feel comfortable to have sex or to derive sexual pleasure from someone that's 5 years older, usually. It could be in certain times even 3 years older. They do not feel comfortable. So although that same day, 2 hours before, they were in the basement with their friend, experimenting and giving each other pleasure, an hour later, if an adult walks into the room and does the exact same thing, that's a big no-no. That's the way human beings work. That's our nature. So on one hand, the child totally wants it, and most people will lie about it and say, no, I never wanted it, because they have to say it. And I went through this with too many people, so I know how it works. But they actually enjoy the warmth, especially the build-up, and they actually do get aroused. But that's not a contradiction that a part of them does not want it, and the only analogy I have for that, you have a mosquito bite, or you have an itch. While you're itching it, you derive pleasure, yet it stings, and many times your hand begins to bleed. But you still chose to do it, and it makes you crazy. But again, it's very, very different than molestation. So molestation is not about sexuality. It's about your body experiencing something you don't want to experience, but you do want to experience. Because you want to walk to the fridge to get something out of the fridge, but yet your body starts walking towards the living room.